Around 1200 BCE, the civilized world effectively ended. Great empires fell, cities burned, and trade routes vanished in a catastrophe known as the Bronze Age collapse. But out of the ashes of this ancient apocalypse, a new, humble group of hill country settlers emerged who would change history forever. In this crucible came the rise of Israel. Hello everyone, this is Gilgamesh. If you'd like to learn more about this very important topic on your own, and I hope that you do, I have some recommended readings in the description that I used when I was preparing this. The Bronze Age Collapse, Nature and Causes. Bronze Age collapse marks the end of the Late Bronze Age, about 1550 to 1200 BCE, and the beginning of the Iron Age, 1200 to 1000 BCE. This was not a singular event, but a long, complex process of societal transformation that encompassed the entire Eastern Mediterranean, characterized by widespread destruction and a shift from urban living back to village culture. Several interconnected factors are identified as contributing to this collapse. Climate change. Recent investigations of pollen indicate a dry phase lasting about 300 years, reaching its peak between 1250 and 1100 BCE. This could have led to massive crop failures, forcing people to move from drier fringes to wetter areas in the hill country, causing turmoil and pressure on cities to expand their farming land. Decline of Egyptian influence. For 400 years, Canaan's history was largely dictated by Egyptian activity. However, in the late Ramesside period, Egypt's hegemonic power, which had been held together under a Pax Egyptica with simultaneous economic exploitation, increasingly lost its grip. The cessation of Egyptian rule in Palestine occurred around the mid-12th century BCE. Collapse of international trade. The Late Bronze Age urban culture was characterized by a division of labor and economic growth through trade and crafts. The collapse of this system led to a decline in international trade, which was a significant factor in the overall societal breakdown. Increase in population. Paradoxically, an increase in population at the beginning of the Late Bronze Age is also cited as a contributing factor, potentially exacerbating resource scarcity and social pressures. Sea peoples invasions. The arrival and settlement of ethnic elements collectively known as Sea peoples, including Philistines, Shardana, and Sikulu, is one of the most fascinating episodes in the beginning of Iron Age 1. This event was an outcome of the profound cultural crisis in the Aegean and Anatolian region towards the end of the 13th century BCE. Their assaults, along with other calamities, were severe blows to Canaanite culture. Internal turmoil and revolts. The Amarna letters indicate that late Bronze Age Canaan was a highly stratified society with rising social tension and economic inequality. Some theories suggest that peasant rebels, possibly associated with the Apiru or Hapiru, fled from cities to empty highlands, resisting the urbanized system and forcing radical change via revolts. Impact on Canaanite culture. The Bronze Age collapse had a devastating and transformative impact on the Canaanite culture. Deterioration and deurbanization. Egyptian domination and exploitation for most of the Late Bronze Age resulted in the deterioration of Canaanite culture. The period saw a reduction in both the number and size of settlements, with many structures from earlier periods continuing in use or being rebuilt with slight modification. Urban culture disappeared in many areas and was replaced with a kind of modified nomadism for over 2 centuries. Destruction of the cities. Many late Bronze Age II cities came to an end in large conflagrations, dated to the late 13th century BCE. Examples include Hazor, Lachish, Megiddo, and Bethel. However, the collapse was not uniform. Collapse of the Canaanite cities thus did not occur at the same time or conclusively. Regional differentiation and New Canaan. Cities in the coastal plain, such as Tel Abu Hawam, Dor, Tel Kisan Akshaf, or Tel El Castil, Tel Castil, and Ashdod, were less affected by deurbanization. Israel Finkelstein described the early Iron Age continuity of the northern city cluster Kinnereth, Megiddo, Yokneam, Tel Rechov, and Beth Shean, Tel Kisan, Dor, and Gezer as the New Canaan, emphasizing their connection to late Bronze Age city culture. Their prosperity likely stemmed from regional importance and continued trade with the Phoenician coast. A shift in societal structure and economy. The late Bronze Age urban culture, characterized by division of labor and economic growth, trade and crafts, gave way to a village culture functioning as a subsistence economy with bartering of natural products. This new village culture was characterized by a relatively low level of social stratification, often referred to as an egalitarian tribal society. Assimilation and transformation. Canaanite society and eventually city-states ceased to be uniquely identifiable as the transition to the Iron Age continued. They were assimilated into the new kingdoms that emerged in the region, including Israel, Judah, Philistia, Edom, Ammon, and Moab. While individual Canaanites may have shown resilience, Canaanite society as a distinct entity exhibited a low degree of resilience, transforming and influencing the new cultures. Indeed, the early Iron Age villages were more Canaanite than the late Bronze Age cities ever were. The intersection with the Hebrew Bible narrative. The period of the Bronze Age collapse is crucial for biblical studies, as it is undoubtedly the period to be associated with the events portrayed in the books of Joshua, Judges, and the parts of the Pentateuch describing the Exodus and the Israelite entry into Canaan. It was the time in which the Israelites first appear in history. The Conquest narrative, Book of Joshua, the traditional view. Earlier scholarship, particularly the Albright-Yadin paradigm, interpreted archaeological evidence of widespread destruction in late Bronze Age II cities, for example, Tel Beit Mirsim, Lachish, Bethel, and Hazor, as corroborating the biblical narrative of a unified Israelite military conquest of Canaan in the late 13th century BCE. Archaeological challenges. However, subsequent archaeological research has largely undermined this military conquest theory. Many key cities mentioned in the conquest narrative, Jericho, Ai, Arad, Gibeon, Yarmut, and Heshbon, were either uninhabited or were small, poor, and unfortified villages during the late Bronze Age. Reevaluation of older digs and new finds indicated that the collapse of the late Bronze Age Canaan was a long process, not a sudden event. Archaeological evidence shows beyond doubt that most late Bronze Age Canaanite sites in Palestine were not destroyed about 1200 BC, and that nearly all the identifiable early Israelite settlements were established peacefully on virgin soil. Of nearly 20 identifiable late Bronze Iron I sites claimed to be forcibly taken by Israelites, only Bethel and Hazor have any archaeological claims to destructions, and even there is no conclusive data to support the notion that Israelites were the agents of destruction. The biblical account in Joshua of a rapid, complete conquest contradicts the book of Judges, which depicts Canaanites and other peoples continuing to occupy major urban centers and harassing the newcomers. The conquest model is now considered unproductive and detrimental for understanding Israel's origins. Israelite settlement and origins, Book of Judges, and alternative models. Archaeological evidence for settlement instead of a conquest Archaeology reveals a gradual, exceedingly complex process of socio-economic change on the late Bronze Age Iron One horizon. Hundreds of small, unwalled Iron One sites, late 13th to 11th century BCE, have been discovered primarily in the Central Hills, but also in Galilee and the northern Negev. Many were founded de novo as new settlements. The Merneptah stele. This Egyptian inscription from the late 13th century BCE, about 1207 BCE, mentions Israel as a settled group in Canaan, indicating their presence in the land before the traditional conquest narrative's time frame. Alternative models for Israel's emergence: peaceful infiltration, supported by Alt, proposed that Israel emerged from the infiltration of nomadic elements into the agrarian urban culture of Canaan. A peasant revolt, supported by Mendenhall and Gottwald, suggested that early Israelites were peasant rebels who fled from the cities of Canaan to the empty highlands, establishing a more egalitarian society. The evolution model, supported by Lemke and Finkelstein, a further development suggesting Israel gradually emerged from the remains of Canaanite urban culture and newly formed tribes. Finkelstein's version posits that the settlers came from within Palestine as semi-nomads who became permanently settled due to the collapse of urban culture and grain trade. Continuity versus contrast. The archaeological record suggests a significant continuity with Canaanite culture in the early Iron Age, challenging the biblical portrayal of a clear contrast between late Bronze Age Canaan and early Iron Age Israel. The transitions were far more fluid than traditionally assumed. The material culture and way of life of the new villagers were far more Canaanite than Israelite. In summary, the Bronze Age collapse profoundly reshaped the southern Levant, leading to a decline of Canaanite city-states and the emergence of new social structures. While the Hebrew Bible's narratives of conquest and settlement are traditionally set against this backdrop, archaeological evidence increasingly points to a more complex, gradual, and indigenous process for the emergence of Israel, characterized by continuity and transformation rather than a sudden external invasion. The biblical accounts, particularly Joshua and Judges, are now often understood as reflecting later literary compositions that incorporated fragmented cultural memories that, while certainly can be seen as relating to historical events, are retelling that history in a way intended to build national unity and identity more than how a modern historian might approach the subject. Most likely, the rise of Israel involved a complex interplay of changing society and the involvement of multiple peoples. Certainly, Israelites had more interaction, cultural interchange, and intermarriage with surrounding cultures than previously supposed. This complexity is frequently hinted at within the narrative of the Hebrew Bible, but it has been frequently underplayed by those wishing to see a more racially pure history. I hope you found this useful. If you would like to support the channel and help me bring more content like this to the internet, please consider a membership in the channel or just simply liking and subscribing and sharing this with your friends on social media. Thank you. Shalom.